Battle of the Alamo ended on March 6, 1836. That date is important to Texans and historians, not because it marked an end, but a beginning. What began in earnest was the battle for Texas independence and the legend of a valiant struggle against overwhelming force.
As I think most of you guys know, yesterday was the 181st anniversary of the fall of the Alamo.
A testament to the strength of that legend is that people are still drawn to it. They gathered at the Siena branch of the Fort Bend Libraries to hear a lecture by Dr. Nicholas Cox, a professor of U.S. and Texas history at Houston Community College in Stafford.
And in the next few pictures, which really come in the 1830s and 40s, you'll notice that following the destruction of the Alamo in the battle, it's missing the sort of iconic bell cupola, right? This sort of the architecture that distinguishes the Alamo from every other mission in your imagination was added to the chapel after the war.
The defenders of the Alamo expected a Mexican invasion, but they were still surprised when it came.
Now, most Americans in San Antonio understood that a Mexican invasion would likely come in the spring, that it would also likely come up the coast and therefore come to Goliad before San Antonio. They did not believe or envision or hold with the possibility that Santa Anna would march that many men over the North Mexican deserts across the Rio Grande and South Texas up to San Antonio directly. And Santa Anna did. By the time he got to San Antonio in late February of 1836, it was a very strong surprise to the American defenders. Now, in a 13-day siege, a lot of Americans actually did find it quite easy to come and go. Davy Crockett wanders in with about 20 Tennesseans, right? And you start to see an Alamo defender corps there that are ready to fight and ready to defend the city and the Alamo. Sam Houston orders them to abandon it. He tells them again, like the Matamoros expedition, this is foolish, it's suicidal, and it's not of strategic value. You should abandon this. Now, Houston favors Bowie's leadership here. The national government favors Travis's. They work out a sort of a joint command agreement after Bowie wins the popular election and turns out to be a sort of a, I don't know if I get struck by lightning by saying a sort of a barely competent alcoholic, right? Bowie, who initially I think in many ways would have preferred to use the basic Goliad or to bring the two forces together, he found that Neal and others, a guy by the name of Green, had really fortified the Alamo, and Bowie came to be convinced that it was defensible and necessary to defend. Now, trying to pin down exactly who died and how many died there has been a matter for historical inquiry all the way since 1836. And I think that the Alamo is generally coming to accept that 220 is probably about the ballpark here for how many Americans and Europeans. There were dozens of men from England, Scotland, and Ireland, as well as about 10 Mexican citizens who died at the Alamo as well. And I think a lot of people of Mexican nationality or in Texas Tejanos did believe that the centralization of power under Santa Anna was making their lives worse. And so there was an ideological agreement between some Tejanos and Anglos that the revolution was necessary, sort of a political revolt rather than an ethnic conflict. In 1836, when the Alamo fell, there were reports by Americans that 5 to 7 Americans were disarmed, that they were captured, that they were taken at the Alamo as prisoners. And that when they were brought to Santa Anna as prisoner of war, Santa Anna expressed frustration. He said, why are they even still alive? And ordered their execution. Now, the officers who held them as captives did not agree with executing prisoners, and so Santa Anna's personal security forces killed them on the spot with their sabers, with their swords. Now, who those 5 to 7 men were, I would suggest cannot positively be identified. We just do not know. But lots of Americans and lots of Mexican soldiers expressed nearly immediately after the war, especially as some of those Mexican soldiers were in detention in Velasco, that one of the men was Davy Crockett. In the 19th century, it was very common, if you go into 19th century books, to find illustrated histories of the Alamo, to see Davy Crockett detained, to see Davy Crockett executed in a firing squad style, to see Davy Crockett pinned against a wall, empty-handed, right? All kinds of illustrations indicating that it was widely accepted that Davy Crockett had surrendered.
The battle cry was "Remember the Alamo." Why do we still remember it 181 years later?
And I think the Alamo captures people's attentions because it is in many ways now a symbol for patriotic sacrifice. Sort of a general understanding that these men gave their lives in defense of an ideal, and that ideal was in many ways continues to be held to the present, this ideal of freedom and liberty in Texas.
For HCC Beat, I'm John Woods.